So I'm going to turn it over now to a couple of our steering committee members. Martin Kuma at University of Utah is going to be leading our topic today and our panel on doing it in public support by Slack, forums, GitHub repos, and blogs. Take it away, Martin.
All right, thanks, Bob. First of all, I want to thank everybody else on the steering committee. The only thing I'm doing for the call is talking. They all did the heavy work of getting the people that will be talking and setting this all up. So thanks to everybody. I would like to make a roll call first because I'm not seeing everybody on the list of people from our panelists here. So let me call out Aaron first. Aaron, are you here? I'm not hearing Aaron, and I didn't see him. Okay, so we'll see if he shows up later. Jana, I think I've seen. Right? Can you say hi?
Hi, Martin.
No? Oh, there you go. Okay, good. Thanks. John Hanks?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. And Maggie?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, great. And Christina, I think I've seen. And Singh? Singh Saluja, am I reading his right, from Brown? Maybe he'll show up later too. I'm gonna call you guys out again once your turn comes. So the topic of today's call is discussion about usage of what I would call non-traditional user support media, to which we have linked which we have sort of linked together Slack and different other ways of chatting, then forums such as Ask CI or potentially Stack Overflow, and then GitHub. Yeah, so we're gonna cover these three by asking different people that have experience or have been using these, what they think about it with the questions that we have listed down below the list of the topics here. So I'm gonna go one after another, and so what we'll probably do is, what I like better is to talk about the first, each of the questions between all the people. So let's start with the first question. Briefly describe the service you're representing, and maybe let's just lump this together with with the second question. So what were your goals to use this service? So let's start with Jana.
Jana, you're still muted.
All right, take two. Thank you, Christina. I'm here to talk about Slack today. So Slack is a chat forum for those of you who are not familiar. It's at an enterprise level, you have to pay for it, but there's a free version that makes it useful for a lot of labs here at our institution use it. And so we launched a Slack channel. And the main goals, we had kind of two goals. One was to build a community out of a very disparate group of researchers. So this is targeting specifically genomics researchers. So researchers who are focused on looking at DNA data in different ways. And I think that field has really exploded across a lot of different departments and schools at all of our institutions. So here at Northwestern, that's not just the medical school, but also we have anthropology and people in material science and people in like civil engineering, people all across the campus who use the same kinds of computational tools and don't know anything about each other. So the Slack channel, by having everybody join a single channel, that was a chance for them to make some connections and to build some community. And then the other goal was to provide support. And hopefully to leverage that community itself to provide support to itself and not just rely on research computing to do that job.
All right. You know what? I'm thinking what might work actually the best is we go over all those questions in one person, because then you kind of got a little drive. So I think let's keep that. I think it might be better.
All right.
Unless somebody else disagrees.
So what I've got next is what worked and what didn't work. So one of the things that Slack provides is you can get these weekly emails that tells you about how people are using your Slack channel. And I've been really continually impressed by how many DMs, how many direct messages happen between members of the community that I'm never aware of. So it's not about direct support and it's not public, but it's part of those connections that I was talking about. The support, so right now I'd say about 50% of the questions get answered by the community, and that's been fantastic. I find that kind of hard though, just to be honest. When a question comes up, I immediately want to answer it. And part of that's that I want to just really prove that I know the answers and I'm competent. And so taking that space to say, all right, well, let's just wait a little bit and see if somebody else can step in here and provide an answer. So that's, I continue to struggle with the right balance there, but it's been important because it really has given the community a chance to step up. Because there are some people who really do want to, well, it's just like people like us, right? People who like to answer questions, but maybe they aren't in research computing. What didn't work? So I have a story. So I guess in the end, this did work, but it did highlight some of the challenges that come with supporting people in this space. So I had a professor actually who was not happy about the wait time that was happening. And so he checked the scheduler and decided that there was a particular user who was egregiously overusing the resources. So he did the finger on it and figured out their name and Googled them. And then, so this cluster is dedicated to genomics research. But what he found out was that this particular person who had launched all these jobs on Google, they were all about molecular simulations on the separation of helium methane mixtures and metal organic frameworks. And so he was very unhappy. We might even say enraged, because he felt like somebody was getting in his way. So on Slack, he made this case. So he very publicly on the general channel said, this person is overusing, they're not even a genomics user. And he finished it out by saying, pitchforks and justice, and then had an emoji of like a scales of justice. So I saw this and I'm immediately like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do with this? So it did turn out to be a teachable moment. So, but it did make me feel like I needed to react right away, which was not, you know, I had to sort of slow down and stop and really take a look at what had happened to myself in a way that made me feel comfortable about responding like, no, actually this person's also doing research that is genomics. And I was tempted to give details, but that wasn't appropriate. So I just said, you know, I know what research they're doing. It does align with the goals of this cluster. And so then the faculty member did take it down. That sort of brought things back to normal. So he said, it's great to see growing demand for this. I didn't intend to do witch hunting. And then he gave a smiley face. But it expressed, I think, some of the vulnerabilities that I feel about doing support in an open forum. I mean, things can happen, and it can happen on the big stage, and everybody can be paying attention. So I really think the Slack channel has been very successful for us, especially as our user community continues to grow and the support staff continues to stay flat. It's a way to help reach people. And I have people come in who say that they never post, but they look at all the answers and they use that as a resource when they're trying to solve problems. So that's been really great too. We have 233 users, I didn't mention that part, that are on this Slack channel. So I recommend it. I had to develop some new skills to be able to feel comfortable. I had to develop some best practices that were slightly counterintuitive, like slow down with answers. And I also had to, you know, it's a continuing struggle, but I had to say, all right, well, I might not be perfect here. And I might not be perfect to everyone who's ever met me at Northwestern. And that's gotta be okay. Otherwise, this isn't really gonna get anywhere.
How do you keep away people who want just to chat about the weather or something? Because you know, you can see how overwhelming it could be if two people just start to communicate with each other and then another 200 have to watch their conversation, and then it's hard to find the real questions.
So we have a number of channels, and one of them, so topics, and one of them is called random. And random is the spot where people can put things like that. And you can turn off your notifications from random, so people who don't want to be a part of that don't have to be.
Do you have any issues with scoping your time to people who have a direct need? I mean, we're a bit more decentralized here, but my concern is, I could spend 100% of my time helping people who are not directly in the departments I serve. I mean, I was talking to another staff member on campus, and he was like, well, one of the reasons that people come and bring their research funding through our group is to get access to me. And if I was going on Slack and providing my support for free to everyone on campus, A, it would take all my time, and B, it would deplete the value proposition to people being a part of our research, our research unit.
That's a really, really good point. And one of the things that I really appreciate that you brought it up, because setting boundaries, that is one of my big goals right now, because I don't think you can provide support in a forum like that unless you can say things like, this needs to be a ticket. You're going to need to open that. We can't address that here, or just find another direction for them to go. Because as you said, if you're not mindful, that can be where all your support resources go. So it's a really good point.
There's quite a few questions in the chat, Jana and Martin. I don't know if you want to address all of these, but I think Clifford, there was a good one about how do you get the word out?
Yes, I started putting in a document here. So I think they are all pretty good and pretty simple, or quick to answer. So first, how did you get the word out that you have a Slack channel?
So actually, like Christina does, we have a mandatory orientation for this particular genomics cluster. And at that point, everyone gets an invite to join.
Okay, how do you support multiple questions happening at almost the same time?
It can happen. It's definitely challenging because it gets confusing for everybody. But again, going back to boundaries, you can also say, we're going to talk about this one first in a thread and then come back over here. Or, yes, I agree, this can be challenging, but I think boundaries help a lot.
How about timing for your staff sort of respondness to the questions?
Right. So, making sure that SLA isn't too aggressive, because one of the challenges with any kind of chat is it inherently carries an urgency with it, even if you don't intend it to. And that's not fair to the other, the other people that you support. So I actually keep it about 24 hours during the work week. And then, of course, never after hours and never on weekends. If you start feeding it, it will come back to your back door. You just have to never go there.
Yeah, sounds good. And do you have any rules or guidelines for the community for behavior, I guess? No.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I have not. So it's been there for 3.5 years, and I didn't do that at the beginning, but I really like that. I think if I felt like we were having some issues, that would definitely be a good place to go. That's a great idea, though, having the community help come up with what those boundaries ought to be, the guidelines.
Great. I just have one personal question. Do you mix this together with your standard ticketing system? So do you have a ticketing system on the side as well?
We have a ticketing system. This is another great point. The Slack support is it's invisible to recording. We don't make metrics with it. I mean, we do have some really general statistics around Slack, but it's not the same as saying how many tickets were resolved in a particular week. That it disappeared in that metric. Yeah,
but I guess I was more meaning with respect to, in my mind, the Slack would be more kind of a quick question or a quick answer kind of setup, whereas the tickets would be something more involved where you need to kind of ping pong with the people back and forth a few times to get it through or things like that.
Yep, absolutely. That's exactly right.
Okay, great. So let's pause Jenna for a while. There are a few other questions that I'll try to compile so we can give space to others. So I'm gonna call Aaron again if he's around. And if not, then maybe, is Aaron here?
Yeah, I'm around.
Oh, great, yes. So can you go and kind of follow the questions that we have here, both the pre-selected and potentially the other ones, if you have something else that to add to what Jenna's already said.
Yeah, so I guess I actually have a question for both of you first, which is somehow my name came up in the context of Slack and this support, but I'm on so many different Slack workspaces. I don't know what you actually found to discover me and invite me to this.
Okay, so you want to do that, Christina?
Yeah, so we're talking about Slack in the context of user support. Like we're talking about non-traditional user support systems.
Yeah.
So beyond tickets, beyond documentation. And so if that's something you're doing that you can speak about, great. Otherwise, we can move on to the next person.
Yeah, no, it is, and I use Slack very heavily. I was just curious, like how I even was discovered in that. One of the ways I've found effective to use Slack is sort of in an inverse way, which is instead of creating a channel and inviting lots and lots of people in a community to it, instead what I find, especially when there are groups, research groups who are running their own projects, they already have their own Slack workspaces. And oftentimes in a consultation, it's not just a one-off question. I know they're going to come back to me over the course of the semester, especially if it's, let's say, a graduate student working with like a group of 10 undergraduate students. And inevitably, they'll have a series of questions that sort of build on one another. And so what I usually end up doing is have them invite me into their Slack workspace. Of course, what it means is on the left-hand side of Slack for me, it's just a ridiculously long list of Slack workspaces that I'm connected to. But then it allows me to do two things that I think are really important. One is if they want to get my attention, please don't send me an email. If you want to get my attention, send me a direct message in Slack. Do it in the public channel. Don't actually go to me directly. So that's one of the things I ask people to do is keep the conversation in the view of the whole team. Direct message me in that more public context. That's because other people probably have a similar question, so it just simplifies it if it's just in the open team. And then, just like all of you on this call, I'm sure you're all really busy with lots of things. There's only certain times I can tune into what they need. So I can occasionally just scan the left-hand side of my Slack screen and see, oh, I've got a little red 1 or 3 sitting there, and I can tune into it when it's a good time for me to tune into it. So it allows me to have a better asynchronous communication with folks, and I can just jump into any of the channels that they have and see kind of their stream of consciousness, where they are in their project flow, so that when I engage with them, it's probably much more effective because I've been able to kind of be a fly on the wall.
So it sounds like that gives you context that you might not get in like an email exchange. And you're also in a public space, so if other people have the same questions, you're kind of sharing that with the whole group.
Yeah, and it's public in the sense of it may just be their team, so one grad student and several undergrads, but the whole team gets to see what's going on. And I kind of, in that sort of open source spirit where a lot of projects are like, don't do private messaging, do all the conversations in public when possible. I think that's a really great culture to be supporting, so that like the really useful stuff doesn't get lost. But also so the whole team can benefit. I think there's another aspect of Slack that's really important, which is how we interact with each other in terms of being a service provider. I'm guessing most of the people on this call wear at least one hat that's kind of a service provider hat. And the relationship that we have with people in our community is a service provider, which is, I don't really think of you until I need you. And when I ask you a question, it's usually far too late. Like, I wish most people would get a hold of me 6 months before they usually do. And so by having them invite me into their Slack workspace, I can become part of the team. And I think that's a really important part that I would like all of us to be thinking about as service providers. How can we step out of our own service provider mentality and instead step into a scalable version of how can I become part of your team for each individual researcher and each individual research group, And when they feel that we're part of a team, they interact with me, they will interact with you differently when they see you as part of the team. The scalable part is not always the easy part, though. So we all get to grapple with that. And I don't have a good answer for that, other than to just be aware that thinking about how we do scale this out is something we think about a lot here at Berkeley. So we have our data science education program, and one of the key ways to be able to manage the large groups of undergraduates who are working on discovery projects, on the data science consulting support for other undergraduates, is to use Slack as one of those conduits for being able to communicate across a large number of people.
All right, so maybe to summarize what you have just said, kind of answering the few questions that we have here. So you essentially got this so that you can get more in touch with the people more interactively, kind of be more directive towards what they need based on the projects they have. So this all sounds great. Did you have any situations when it didn't work, or where you had some troubles, and how did you get over those?
Yeah, one of the challenges is there's a lot of people who don't want yet another tool on their stack. I think even folks in the world of IT, for some reason, often don't like yet another tool or yet another thing that they have to check. That might be true of people on the call. Sometimes that's true of myself. And so I think one of those things is just kind of noticing what is my own resistance to using a tool. For me, I had no resistance to Slack. I'm one of those like big time slackers. The moment I discovered it, I was like, of course, this is like just an obvious way to communicate. But realizing it's not obvious to other people, and it can cause a lot of anxiety, and it can cause a lot more confusion and miscommunication at first, unless people really feel like they're supported in being able to use the tool. So in my own team here, I recently asked somebody to, go through the process of installing the Slack app, because those of you longtime Slackers know, don't leave your Slack lost in your browser tabs, install the app. So finding those best practices and making sure that each person on the team is onboarded is really hard, because people want to have their own way of doing things. And so, yeah, I think the hardest part, and what often doesn't work, is the resistance that people have. They're not often getting the support they need to be able to use the tool effectively when they're already feeling overwhelmed.
Yes, I would agree. That's probably my problem too. I'm used to watch our tickets coming in emails. I'm a big time email person. And so the chats are just not something that appeals to me. And so, if we would choose to do something like this, I would definitely have to reprogram my head a little bit to kind of be more following what's going on on the chatbot. So, yeah. All right. In the interest of time, maybe let's move on to John. And then we will address some of the questions that are here after everybody has a chance to speak. There are a few other good questions, I think, out there, but what we're going to do is we're just going to throw out a question, and one of you guys can pick it and answer it. All right, so John, do you have anything specific or special to say that the two other people didn't say yet?
Not a whole lot. I think my experience parallels Jana's experience pretty closely. The one major thing that's different is I'm a sysadmin, so sysadmin first and user support second. So I approached our Slack instances from the perspective of a sysadmin. How do I help improve the system while helping users? From that perspective, Slack is tremendously useful for building trust between the users and the people that are using the cluster. And I had a lot of success, I think, in building that trust by being completely open about what was going on the system. A lot of times when you're running a cluster, if you have an announcement mailing list, everybody ignores that. You can't put too many things on it. Maybe you put too few things on it. You can't balance that well. And is everybody on the mailing list? But if you can get that community centralized around Slack, and build that community around the cluster as a resource, and have everybody more or less paying attention there and have a look all the time, then just doing things like, if I'm in the data center and I'm working on a node, posting pictures of the inside of a server, day to day, to me, the inside of a server is one of the most boring things in the world, right? Unless it's some new esoteric hardware. But people that use our systems have no idea how these things work on the inside. And I was fascinated by how many positive responses I would get from people just by keeping them abreast of, today I'm putting memory in this machine, or I'm upgrading Slurm from this version to this version, here's what's going to change, whatever. Little day-to-day tasks that I could just fire off a quick blurb on there that people would respond to positively, and kind of help build that relationship between the group providing the service and the people using the service. I guess the other thing to say to differentiate my environments, the first Slack environment I used at KAUST, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, there were only 2 of us supporting the cluster, and we supported about 300 or 400-ish users through Slack. And we did not use a ticket system. We did all of our support through Slack. And then at Stanford, I supported a smaller cluster with more users. So I did all my primary support through Slack, but my group at Stanford had a ticket system that we could fall back on if the users wanted to submit a ticket. And there, I think as of 2 weeks ago, we were just under 800 users in the Slack instance.
So I'm curious, how did you advertise this to the users? Kind of similar to what the other guys did? Did you have some sort of a training where you sort of encourage people to join, or have mass email to all the users, or what else?
So every time I created an account, I immediately invited the user through Slack to join Slack. Then the message of the day said, primary support will be through Slack. Here's the URL to join our Slack workspace. And then in our on-demand instance, I mentioned Slack in the front page of on-demand.
Okay. All right. That's good. Yes. All right, Maggie, do you have anything else to add? You guys have some more unique system, sounds like. So maybe if you spend some time about that and then see what worked, what didn't, and so on.
Sure. I've been kind of making some notes here. I'll just not reiterate what other people have said. So to preface it, we use a traditional ticket system for user support, plus office hours and documentation. And of course, as everyone's discussed, it's always unwanted noise that's the problem. We do use Slack, but only internally. We don't allow users in. It's only with our internal teams and groups we work with, like Bob's group or the School of Engineering. And labs might work with someone, but they'll create either a private room, or that person that's working with them will join, their Slack. But I think I was primarily asked to talk because we have a long and storied, or stormy, I don't know, history with doing on-demand chat on our website with our user base. We originally added chat on our website using Zopim several years ago. We thought it was worthwhile. We did end up moving because Zopim wasn't very customizable and it was kind of unreliable. But initially people were excited by the idea. It was a new and shiny way to get support. Volume was fairly good in the old days. That's foreshadowing. I would say anywhere from 5 to 25 people, or 5 to 25 unique calls a day early on. In fact, Bob, you used to do some of those. We then moved to a service called Userlike, which was more customizable, and we were able to integrate it into the site a bit better. It had easier ways to set a schedule so that it would only be visible during certain times, and et cetera. And that actually caused an uptick in our usage dramatically for a while. There would be anywhere from 5 to 40 on a really unusual day of unique calls. So we had a roster of people each week that we would rotate through, who would just basically monitor chat all day. They would, get a notice when a new chat start, and Userlike would round robin between those people. So that worked well for a while. Over time, the volume of calls did begin to dwindle. There was, I think, once the novelty of it wore off, and the problem became, it just became a way for a small number of people to basically skip to the front of the line versus putting in a ticket, which we should have foreseen, but we didn't. And then we ended up with a small number of people who were using it, and they also became repeat callers. So they chat in the morning, and then they'd go try the thing you told them to do, and then they would come back and so forth. And one of the problems that we really didn't foresee is it's really a drain on your people, because the rotators, even on a day when there are no calls, you're basically watching this thing, or waiting for this thing. You can't leave your computer except for lunch, so you have to be there at all times. So that became a drain, and then I think the frequent flyers began to, I think people began to resent that. So eventually we dropped user-like, and we didn't just turn it off. Well, we did just turn it off, but we changed our documentation to say, hey, if you need to chat with someone, you can initiate a chat with us. And we used a service called Slack, which let us put a thing on our site, but it would just use Slack. We didn't have to have they didn't actually come into it. Sorry, it used Slack for us to communicate to them. They didn't actually come in through Slack. So we had that up for a while, and it got used 3 times. So we basically just abandoned this whole thing altogether. I don't know if you saw my little robot earlier. We had our little Audibot robot, who was our mascot, and we symbolically killed him on October 2018. So, so that's my story.
So this doesn't sound all as exciting as all the other ones. So maybe people got a little cold shower if this after all the excitement about Slack use or Slack support. But I guess it all depends on what your site is up to and how far you want to push it with respect to response times and the commitment of your staff and stuff like that.
I think it's something that a larger organization would be enticed by, but I actually think it's not good for larger organizations. I know that seems counterintuitive, like our university's IT department heard about this and they got really excited, and we're like, no, do not do this. It will ruin you, But I think perhaps for a smaller user base, it might work. But I can't speak from experience because, like I said, we tried it and it just was not a success overall. I mean, it worked for a while, it was nice, but I have regrets.
Yes. Okay, great. In the interest of time, let's move on. There is a few other questions that I think would be sort of useful to answer just because I would be curious about it myself. For example, how do you address vacation? So that that relates to basically how responsive you want to have this service, right? So how do you guys what are your user expectations in this domain?
I maybe would have a clarification there. This word vacation, what does that mean?
Persons out of town or whatever out. So I presume everybody's got a team here, so you don't have one person watching these services, right? Like that, we do the same thing for a ticketing. We essentially have a bunch of people that rotate through. Right,
so in my case, in both my instances of using Slack to support clusters, in one case, I was a team of 2. In the other case, I was effectively a team of 1 because I was the only sysadmin in support for my specific cluster. And what I found is, even if traveling, no matter where I'm at, what time of day it is, whatever, it was fairly easy to just check Slack. And if there was like an urgent issue, deal with it like I would normally do if somebody who was on call in a situation like that called me. And if it was not urgent, just reply to the people and say, hey, I'm not in right now. I'm out vacation, whatever. I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. From my perspective, that was super easy to do. I didn't mind doing it when I had cell service. And from the user perspective, they got an immediate response, and I could set a reminder in Slack to just remind me to get back in touch with them when I was back in the office.
Yeah, that's reasonable as long as you're willing to spend your time monitoring your phone and stuff on the vacation, I guess. But Most of us do. Anybody else? I guess we probably more or less covered this. Do you believe Slack chat will continue to scale? I guess you guys have a fair amount of users. There is even Ben saying you guys have 900 users. So we could probably say that is true, that it will scale. Let's see what else we have. What metrics do you use to justify the commitment? Or do you guys have any metrics to justify the time commitment of people to do this?
There are metrics that Slack itself provides, but they're not really as robust as what we get out of our ticketing system. So I think, so in our community, the primary support's provided by the ticketing system, and the people on Slack know that. So I think that helps a little bit with that SLA question. I think accurately capturing how much time Slack takes, I think I could do better at that, definitely. So on our site, we have, a number of people on the team who do monitor the channel and keep track, of questions when people go on different vacations. But I think the metric question's a really good one.
Yeah, I would argue that it's, even with the ticketing system, it's very ambiguous how much time you spend on each ticket and things like that. Our system somewhat comes up with a time, how much we spend on a ticket, but it sounds to me like it basically monitors how long you had that ticket open in your browser, which of course is not corresponding to how much time you spend on it. So, yeah, I don't know. I think not having,
for just a second.
Yeah.
Even if you can't answer the time commitment, can anybody speak to how you measure the impact?
Oh, that one's pretty easy to measure by stopping answering questions on Slack and listen for the complaints. Other than that, you get tons of positive feedback. I mean, people like getting an answer right away. They like interacting with you, human to human, not human to ticket system to human. You get a lot of positive feedback about that stuff. And having just left Stanford, I can tell you in the messages I got in the last week there, when people found out I was leaving, it definitely had a positive impact. But converting that into something that a manager can look at, no idea. Your manager either knows you're doing a good job or they don't know what you're doing at all, in which case that's a manager problem, not a your problem.
All right, that's the instant gratification is pretty important, I would say, in this case. That's for sure. Yeah, we cannot really do that with the tickets that quickly. All right, let me wrap this up because we're kind of running a little bit late. Maybe in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is let's switch gears and talk about GitHub first, because we are planning to spend a whole call on Ask CI next month. And so I'll give Christina some time to talk about how they use GitHub for their support, and then if we still have some time, we will talk about briefly about Ask CI today, and if not, then we will talk about it next month.
All right, thanks, Martin, and thank you everyone for your questions in the chat. If you have more, I think we'll hopefully have time to circle back to even more of them. So I don't have much to say, just that our website infrastructure, we recently switched from the platform we were using to our center website and the documentation being written in Markdown in a GitHub repository, and then serving up a nice looking website somewhere else. We emailed our users about this, and at least a few people forked the repository. It remains to be seen how many people actually contribute fixes or information to the documentation, but I think we haven't gotten very far down this road, and so I'd be interested from hearing from anyone else who's done this, whether that can become another avenue for users to provide feedback to us, either by opening issues about links that are broken or pages that are unclear, or even being able to contribute materials. So that's kind of one way that we're using GitHub, and it's still very much an experiment about how involved we want or would like or can get our users in that space. We're also, I think, moving towards or trying out this idea of having some repositories in our Center's GitHub organization where people can contribute like sample scripts, job submit files, that kind of thing. We have one repository right now like that, and we have had contributions from a couple people to it. They were all in the same group, and we're working more deliberately with that group on some specific functionality in our system, so that, you know, whether or not we'll just get random people contributing in the future, I'm not sure. But it's definitely something I think we're interested in being able to provide maybe like a wider variety or more specialized documentation than we could write up on our own, by having users contribute like the scripts and the submit files and the whatever that they've created, and have that in a publicly accessible place to work with. So I think it's too early for me to answer some of those later questions, like what's worked and what hasn't worked. And I think we're still figuring out how to communicate that to people. Is it something that we put more clearly on our website, or that we email everybody, or whatever? So thoughts or suggestions would be appreciated.
So I have a question for you. How do you manage the user submission on a GitHub repo?
Manage it. I mean, our assumption is
How do you allow
that
people to submit, say, anonymous person to submit a contribution to your GitHub?
I think our assumption is that we'd be using a kind of standard pull request GitHub
workflow. Okay, so it would be through pull request. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. We have a question from Viravan here. Do you allow GitHub issues to discuss questions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Viravan. And I think we would probably use it for certain kinds of questions, but not others. And that would be like, I'd just following our repositories. And if someone asks a question relevant to that repository, I would answer it there. And if not, I would say, why don't you submit a ticket? All
right. Maybe I'll add, from our experience, we're doing something similar. We build an open on-demand example Slurm scripts for OOD, and we put them on our public GitHub, and I occasionally use it to point people to, say, a Slurm script for ANSYS or this and that, so that they can pull it from there directly and, you know, use it in their shell and things like that. So I think for that, it's actually a pretty good media. Otherwise, that's pretty much all we're doing, right? So it's similar to what you guys do. All right.
Yeah. I'd be curious, just real quick, is there anyone else on the call who has like a repository of user contributed stuff, either in like a wiki or a GitHub or somewhere, that has any wisdom to share about this idea?
So I'll speak up. I work for the Vermont EPSCoR program, and so my user community is pretty small, like 25 researchers or so. But we spun up an instance of GitLab, and basically whenever someone wants to collaborate on code, I make them use the GitLab repository because A, it makes it easier for me to version things, and B, it kind of gives them a new tool as they move on in their kind of academic life. Most of our researchers aren't computing people; they're like domain scientists, and so there's a little bit of a training involved. But I feel getting people on a versioning control system when you have a large group all contributing to the same code base, I think that's worth the lift. We don't really have like a spot where people just dump code. When there's like a project or a piece of code that someone wants to like share or use, I'll create a new repo for it and then share it out. And so some people have write rights to it, and some people have read rights to it. But it's worked pretty well. We have like 25 different repositories that we created over the last 5 or 6 years of all kinds of stuff, from APIs to accessing a database to like our code for a specific team. And the one thing I've been surprised about is people are using the issues to like track tasks and advancements that they want to make. And that was kind of without my guidance. They found the issues thing and thought it was a nice little project management kind of thing. I've been happy with it. So
All right, that's good. Yeah, it probably works better if you have more sort of specialized people that are working on a similar topic. In a general case, it might be harder, but on the other hand, some people need these specialized questions, so, or specialized problems. So yes. Okay, let's switch last gear. So we have 8 more minutes, and Singh is here. So let's talk a little bit about Ask CI, and with that caveat that we're going to be talking much more about it next month. So maybe Singh, why don't you just quickly say what it is and what you guys are using it for, and then we will dive more deeper into it next month.
Okay, so Ask CI is still a pretty new platform to us. It actually started out as a wish list, like users wanted to install Open On Demand, and we don't have an implementation of that. So users were just like, oh, can you install it on your cluster? So that's how it started. But basically what we are trying to do, we are posting all of our maintenance outages and everything, whatever happens to our cluster on ask.ci. And even for like tickets and stuff, like if you have like a regular ticket, oh, my keys are not working, I just have like small issues like with my SSH keys. So we just point our users to ask.ci, and I think our ticket overload has gone down, because right now we are just 2 people handling all the tickets. So posting things, like sharing things with everyone, has made our life a little simpler. So.
All right, great. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this next month, how you guys are actually using it. Honestly, I am not all that familiar with it myself, so I'm kind of looking forward to hear from the people that are behind it. So you are more or less using it more than actually feeding it, right?
Yeah, we're more of the user side. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So I definitely want to hear from the people that are feeding it. So maybe we will kind of move this to the next month discussion, and we have a couple more minutes left. So what I would propose maybe is to spend some more time discussing the Slack. Do you guys have some objections to that? There was a few other questions out there that sounded reasonable, except that I've kind of lost track of them. So maybe let's do it this way. Does anybody have some other strong feeling about Slack they want to share? Because we did have a lot of contributions on the chat here from different people that might have gotten kind of lost to some or most. So if you have some strong feeling about what you wrote, why don't you sound off and we can talk about that? And nobody's got strong feeling.
This is Annalie. I'll speak up. I'm at UCLA, and I have been trying to lead the digital humanities community in terms of support. And yet we don't really have a designated home for research support, or we haven't had it to date. We're trying to form that now. So I've been sort of the hub for all the inquiries about researchers wanting to do digital humanities research on campus. And I don't have any real staff, very, very little staff to support that. So Slack has been invaluable to us, and I would highly recommend it for those who are in need of a way to coalesce all of the inquiries and connect all of the nodes of expertise. And by nodes, I mean people, largely, right? Without having to go out and pre-discover and pre-organize all of that. There's no organization, you just set it up, and the community organically grows itself. And at least in our experience, it has. And I did very little to do that. And honestly, I did it on a workspace that wasn't research focused. It's the UC Tech workspace, which has got all kinds of channels on it. But the research channels were those that people went to. They found them themselves, and we were able to really help people. I wasn't able to help people, but I was able to help people by finding the people who could help them through Slack. So I really would advocate it for any kind of context like that.
That's such a great point, Annalie. I mean, that really is what you want, because as it grows exponentially and we stay who we are, just finding a way to help them take care of each other. It's a really, really good point. Yeah. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the call here. So I just want to thank everybody. This was a great discussion, but special shout out here to thanking Aaron Kulich, John Hanks, Maggie McPhee, Singh Salucha, Christina Koch, and also Martin Kuma for doing some hosting for us. This was Doing It in Public. We will have all of this in the document. We will grab the chat, and we'll be able to continue to answer and ask questions about this as we move forward if you want to follow up on some of these ideas. If you haven't signed in yet, please do so now. Our next topic, as Martin was mentioning, we're going to be doing a deep dive on Ask CI and how can we use that to leverage our support. Again, following up on this theme that we've been into this year about we have more support than we can provide in traditional means. So how can we leverage some of these other ideas to provide support? Our next call is going to be on March 12th. And if you haven't used Ask CI, just go ahead and check it out between now and then. You can just type Ask CI in your web browser and it'll take you to the site. You can sign up, you can answer a couple of questions, see what you think. Just a reminder also, this call was recorded. The recording will be up soon. And in addition to our speakers, I want to go ahead and thank Annalie Brugg, Amy Nesser, Katya Olenek, Bob Freeman, Claire Mizumoto, Christina Koch, and I'm Jana Nugent. And please join us again next month. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.